this computer. All right, everyone. Hello. Happy Monday. Welcome to our personal class and workshop and study session of Structure and Surprise. I am Tresha Faye Haefner. I'm also the co-host of, I was the co-host of the Poetry Salon cast, and now I'm actually just the host because my two other co-hosts went and had kids, and something made it impossible for them to host the podcast and also raise children. I think having kids takes a lot of time, I'm told. For me, my podcast, my poetry friends, you are all my babies. So that's something that I get to devote most of my time to. Lucky me. That's a long introduction, but that is my long-winded way of introducing myself. And today I have a really special guest. You would know him as Michael Theune, author or editor of Structure and Surprise, the book that I never stopped recommending to poets and never stopped talking about. I'm going to call him Mike, and apparently his last name is pronounced Tooney, like two knees. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Tree. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, it is really very funny. This is the first time I think you and I are meeting on Zoom or anywhere at all.
It feels strange. Yeah. It feels like
Yeah,
we've
it's
known each other for some time.
it is funny when you read people's poetry or you read their, what they obsess about all the time. And you have this shared background knowledge and yet, I don't really know that much about you outside of the poetry world. So so
There's
this is
nothing more to know. That is it.
well, let's start with one question. Where are you coming from? I know you're an hour behind me in terms of time zone,
Sure.
but where do you live?
Yeah, 2 hours, I think.
Hmm.
You're Pacific, right? So I'm
No,
in
I'm
Central.
okay. I'm East Coast time in
Okay,
North
cool.
Carolina,
Nice. Okay, great.
but when I started reading and teaching Structure and Surprise, I was Pacific Coast time. So
Gotcha.
actually, a lot of my poetry friends and poetry mentors are Pacific Coast time
Cool.
poets.
Cool. Well,
Um,
I am square then in flyover country. So I'm in the middle of Illinois. So I live in Bloomington, Illinois. It's kind of between Chicago and St. Louis. I teach at a small liberal arts school here called Illinois Wesleyan University, and I've been here. I think I just finished up my 24th year of teaching at Illinois Wesleyan. And yeah, when I look, and for the most, I was actually born on the East Coast, but did a lot of growing up in rural Iowa, and my family now lives in Western Michigan. And so as I tell people, kind of the decoder ring for that is my father was a minister in a church that had Dutch roots, and so I've kind of lived in Dutch enclaves in the United States while growing up. So New York, New Jersey, rural Iowa, Western Michigan and then I went on my educational journey, which took me to my own destinations. Um, uh, so so that's kind of been the journey, but I've been here 24 years, which is a huge chunk of my life.
That is a huge chunk of your life. And I'm looking at your bio because you have a BA from Hope College. Where's that
Yeah,
located?
yeah. So that's in Holland, Michigan, right? So talk about Dutch. So I've lived in two towns that have had tulip festivals, right? So
Oh my
and
God.
the college I went to is called Hope College in Holland, Michigan. It's a church, it's a school that's affiliated with the church that my father was a minister in. And so yeah, it was an amazing undergraduate education there. Hope College was a terrific school then. From everything I hear now, it still is. Two of my nieces just graduated this year from Hope College, and I had an amazing poetry education there. My professor, key professor, I had amazing professors, but a key poetry professor is a poet named Jack Riddle, Ridl. Um, and Jack just inspired me and fanned the flames. And he was a tremendous mentor to a number of people. And I had the privilege of being one of those people. Um, I would say, however, that even though certain that I thought about the poetic turn even back then. I don't think that I became conscious of it until much later in my education. So I don't know how much we want to get into that now, but but anyway,
Yeah,
so yeah, Hope College.
let's put a tiny little pin in that because of course you've just opened a couple of doors that I want to go down. But let me
Sure.
very briefly tell people, started in Hope College, then Oxford University, another
Yeah.
BA because how can you stop after
Why
one?
not?
They're pretty addictive. Then an
Yeah.
MFA from the University of Iowa, and
Yeah.
then a PhD from the University of Houston. So yeah, you have
Yeah.
been kind of up and down the middle of the country, the heartland.
It's true.
Um, and now out in Illinois, so near Chicago, which is great because that's where AWP is next year, and
It's
that's
fantastic. Yeah.
yeah, it's a great, it's a great city. I love
Great city.
Chicago.
I
I
love
cannot
Chicago.
wait to go back. And your father was a minister. Did that
Yeah.
influence your desire to write poetry? Do you think that it maybe uh gave you some of the bug? I mean, is poetry and um prayer, are there connections there for you? There's definitely connections there for me.
Undoubtedly. Yeah.
Mm.
I this is a few years ago now, but I wrote a document. I think it actually was in a document that I wrote applying to be try to see if I could become an endowed professor at Illinois Wesleyan. And when I spoke about my teaching, I opened with saying, I actually said my father was a minister. And I said,
Mm.
I view my teaching as and then in parentheses, I said fully secular, and then close parentheses, ministry. And then I explained, right, that it is precisely about I get to share texts that are important to me with other people. I get to teach those texts. I get to create enthusiasm within people and help direct that enthusiasm in interesting and creative ways. And I get to try to work to create community. And I was like, this is what I was like, this is ministry. And it's ministry, though, that allows me to not have to work with a metaphysics that I don't share. So, but everything else feels very familiar to me. So yes, undoubtedly, this is an inheritance from my father.
Yeah, you say that, and one thing I find very interesting in that is sometimes when I've taught poetry and writing, I have to be very careful because I also want to be secular and I also want to make sure anyone from any tradition, anything from being
Right.
an atheist to some religion that I've never even heard of, I'll sometimes use Saint Francis of Assisi's prayer to just talk about like that transformation because it's, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is ignorance, knowledge. I think I got that one wrong. For it is not in loving that we are loved. It is not in giving, it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, is through death that we are born into eternal life. But just all of that, I'm just like, you know what we're talking about? We're talking about transformations. We're talking
Yeah.
about, from hate to love, from ignorance to, it's not ignorance to bliss. What is it? Is it ignorance to knowledge? Ignorance to wisdom. So it's
Yeah.
ignorance to
Yeah.
wisdom, and it's like that's kind of what we want from poetry. We want something that's going to move us from one thing to another thing. And, in poetry, the polarities can be reversed. You can go from happiness to sadness, you can go from hero to anti hero, but we need to see some kind of transformation one way or the other. And that prayer, I just think, is like, that's such a great way of putting it out there in a way that's easy to understand. You don't really have to understand metaphor. You don't have to like go, "Ooh, what is this image implying?" He's just telling you
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
emotional state to that emotional state.
I love it. It's beautiful. What I love about that kind of language, what feels poetic about it is precisely the way that it kind of leaps and kind of shimmies and makes connections that we don't typically make in our daily lives, that our
Mm,
minds are always ready to be opened by a new metaphor, by a new connection. And it's pretty amazing how quickly we can kind of get right within a kind of narrow tunnel. We get tunnel vision in terms of kind of our own lives and what we allow in. And by engaging with poetry, and then, but also potentially depends on, I think, the religion or the approach to the religion, perhaps much more so, right? These are ways that there are different, these human practices that can open up that vision and that can show new connections and that enliven us and transform us and that right, like we're going to be transformed no matter what. Like there's a
Mhm.
great, I love the poem by Jory Graham called Prayer, right, which is kind of it begins with this kind of meditation on a school of minnows in kind of roiling currents of water. So the minnows are all moving, trying working with the currents, and then the turn happens and it goes right. This right, I forget the exact term, but it's like this is the force of faith. Never again are you the same. What you want is to be pure. What you get is to be changed, right? Like we're going to be changed. And the question is, are we going to kind of be able to work with that? And poetry, I think, helps give us a toolkit for thinking about and thinking through and thinking alongside some of those simply necessary transformations that will occur as our lives proceed.
This is a great kind of segue into asking the question, how did you conceive of and go about collecting all of the essays or the chapters in structure
Yeah,
and surprise? I mean,
yeah.
and let me actually just say a little bit about what this book has meant to me. And I wrote a Substack about this. So, I have a very I'm going to say I have a wild imagination, but I don't think that's quite it. It's more like I'm easily distracted is and I have too many thoughts and just a lack of organization in general. It's not nearly as romantic as it sounds when you say a wild imagination. No, I'm not sitting here thinking about the fawns running in the forest. I'm thinking like what is it I forgot to do yesterday? And how do I write that email begging forgiveness for what I forgot to do yesterday? And also, what's for dinner tomorrow? And how could I say something so stupid last week? It's not great. It's just
Yeah.
very, 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 very chaotic. And when I first started writing, um, I I really loved the sonnets because the sonnets were like, hey, take all this wild chaos and let's just go 14 lines. And then instead of thinking about trying to be profound, let's just focus on da 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 da. Shall I compare thee
Yeah.
to a summer's day? Iambic pentameter, and I wrote like one of those a day all through my sophomore year. And then I wanted to get into free verse and everything fell apart. It was like, you have the jar of marbles and then I took away my sonnet form and all the marbles just went spilling and nothing I wrote made any sense. And then Sally Ashton, one of my teachers, introduced me to structure and surprise, and I was like, oh,
Wow.
here's another jar. Here,
Ha ha
start
ha.
scooping
Right.
the
Sure.
marbles. Start scooping the marbles in. So I love what this book has done for me personally as a person, but also as a poet. I didn't get an MFA. I don't know that I would have had the educational wherewithal, the background to understand how to write and edit and finish a poem. If it weren't for, lots of great books that I've read that have
Sure.
helped, but Structure and Surprise was probably one of the first that really helped me get a holistic sense of what a poem needed to look like.
It's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. So now do you tell me,
Yeah.
like, how did you come up with this? Was there a voice?
Yeah.
Was there a burning bush and
Yeah.
10
Yeah.
tablets?
Yeah. There was. There in fact was. So here's a little of the origin story. And it goes back to my time at Iowa. It's a 2-year program. It was my first year at Iowa, and I was in a poetics course with Jory Graham. And Jory she had us like we had our first class, so the first assignment was we had to like write an initial like statement of poetics, right? So where are we in our poetry? What do we believe about poetry? Why do we need poetry? And we all dutifully brought them in and read them. And Jory in class, she was receptive enough, but she was beautifully critical because she was like, here are some words that appear once in all of these. And I forget what some of those words are, but then she was like, here's a word that appears in none of your Ars Poetica. And she goes, it's the impossible. And I was like, I didn't even know that we had to think about the, so, right, full on Jory Graham moment. And so she was like, and because of this, we're going to go back and we're going to look at haiku. And I was like, I had no idea what the connection was between any of that. But Jory then proceeded to look at some haiku. And so I still remember one, and it remains one of my favorite haiku. And it goes, late autumn, my neighbor, how does he live? And Jory did this thing where she had seemingly no interest in form except like the basics of three short lines put together. What Jory was incredibly invested in was this idea that a poem, on the one hand, uh, began with kind of what she called a composed place. And the poem composes its place, puts you in a situation. And so in that poem, right, that is at least like late autumn. And so for Jory, Jory would point out, she'd say, like, yeah, in part, like late autumn is kind of symbolic of death, right? That's happening. But she was like, much more importantly, we have to think about the physicality of late autumn. And that is that one of the things that's happened is that the leaves are falling off the trees, and suddenly you're in a position where you can perceive new possibilities. And so she's like, what happens is you see your neighbor through the trees. And then she's like, so the poem gives us this kind of composed place. And then I forget if she talked about this. I think she did talk about this, but that's also very much a concept that comes out of the meditative tradition. So that's Saint Ignatius Loyola. When he
Mhm.
talks about praying, he talks about that an important step of prayer is composing the place, like compose your imaginative space for your prayer to take place and really think about the details of it. So specifically, like if you're thinking about right, so Ignatius Loyola, Catholic saint, right, is really kind of thinking about like trying to get people to really envision like the agony of Jesus on the cross, right, would be something worth trying to really envision. But so Jory's kind of secularizing this, but it's still this vital thing. But then Jory goes, but the point about composing a place then is that so she's like, there's the occasion.
Mhm.
And then she says, but what a poem really then wants to give you is she says, and it's she takes it from a line from a Wallace Stevens poem, and she says, what the poem wants to give you is the cry of its occasion. So she said the poem doesn't want to explain itself. The
Yeah.
poem doesn't want to give extra details. The poem doesn't want to, that the poem is this combination of occasion and cry of the occasion. And so in that particular haiku, the cry is, how does he live? Like it's this like part, I actually don't even mean this in any sort of double entendre. Like there's an old version of this word that was used in like the early modern era. Like in fact, George Herbert has a poem called Sacred Poems and Private Ejaculations. It is an ejaculation, right? It's an exclamation. It's a surprise.
Mhm.
It's like, here is this moment, and then, oh my God. Um, and that lesson kind of struck me to the core.
Mm.
And it stuck with me forever. And then there was this kind of series of fortunate coincidences that then allowed that moment to begin to resonate out. So I was able to work with at a Breadloaf Writers Conference. I worked with Ellen Bryant Voigt, who it turns out is one of the great thinkers about poetic structure. She's got this truly great essay called the flexible lyric. And I think she was thinking about that essay at this time. So she re-emphasized some of that. And then I just started my PhD program a few years after that, and then took a course in Romanticism and read some amazing works that then really appear in different ways in Structure and Surprise. So a great book by Anne Mallour called English Romantic Irony, and then the great essay by M.H. Abrams called Structure and Style in the Greater Romantic Lyric. And so that's the descriptive meditative poem. And once I discovered those, finding that there were these names for these things, I was like, wait a second, wait a
Yes.
second. This
Yes.
is connected to that vital thing Jory was talking about, but why don't, and now I found these by studying Romanticism, but why am I just now discovering these on my own? Why isn't this a natural part of kind of the way that we discuss poems? And then once I started discovering those, then, pretty much had set my course and kind of, started keeping my eye out for different things and tried to figure out some of the ways that poems moved. And then, made the list of poems that are in Structure and Surprise. And then it was all sorts of fortunate things and meeting with incredibly competent people. So my editors at Teachers and Writers Collaborative, the poet Christina Davis and Chris Edgar, amazing people who allowed me to team up with different writers, and my writers were amazing. So I had plenty of suggestions for them about poems they might write about. But they picked the structure and I gave them stuff, and then they all invariably had ideas to contribute. And so it just kind of unfolded from there. But happy to go into detail on any of that. But that's the acorn that then grew into the
Grew
oak
into
that is
this.
that grew I guess, or the flower seed that turned into this flower.
Well, I have so many questions and topics and little rivulets I could start us on. I'm going to ask the folks, these wonderful folks up here who have been studying this with me, some of them for just the last couple of weeks, some for years. If you
Amazing.
guys have questions, please put them in the chat. And if you're still thinking of questions, that's great too.
And
Um, I,
do you mind, Tree? I don't mean to, do you mind, could we take 5 minutes? And for anybody who's, I'd love to just hear a little bit from each of the participants just to know where people are kind of calling in from, where people are physically, if they're willing to share. And then just a word or two about maybe a poet they're interested in,
oh, I like
or
that.
what they're working on. But just a minute from everybody, just so I can get a sense of who we are here.
Yeah. Does it matter to you if they just put that in the chat just because
Anything is fine with me. How you
yeah.
you run it as you want to do it.
Yeah, I always joke around, but we've got a few poets here. I'm pretty sure are part of the witness protection program. They always
I
have
get it.
their
I get
video
it.
off, and
I
I just don't
believe
want
it.
to
I can
believe
tell.
everyone should be able to write. So yeah, guys,
Sure.
and poets
And
of
zero pressure. Don't do it if you don't want to. Don't, just whatever, just zero pressure.
yeah, say where you are coming from. I'm currently in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, another place that has tulips every spring. So I love it. And what poet am I working on? I mean, I'm still working my way through Diane Seuss's
Ooh,
Frank.
what a book.
Um, I'm reading other things too. I mean, I've just see, this is a dangerous question. This is a dangerous question. It's better we put one poet. You guys are allowed to put one poet in the chat.
Very
But while
good.
everyone's composing that, one question I had was about who you assigned what. Uh, because I feel like there's certain poets that I will admit I've read their chapter in Structure and Surprise over and over, and I might not even be all that familiar with their work.
Of course,
Um,
of course.
it happens, right? But there's others that I'm more familiar with. Like I think you asked me what my favorite structure is, and I right now
Yeah.
I said the dialectic, but you know what the structure I use the most
What's
is
that?
probably the emblem. I think that's the one I
Yeah.
gravitate towards the most. And I think one of my poets that I most naturally am like, consciously or unconsciously, is probably someone like Mark Doty.
Yeah.
And for
Yeah.
me also Elizabeth Bishop and
Yeah.
the
Great.
great poet
Beautiful.
Yvonne Bolland. But like I love his work and I love what he says about the emblem and I love his book, The Art of Description.
You
Um,
bet.
so it's perfect that he's doing the emblem poem because I'm like, Mark, half of the work you write is an emblem poem. So of course you would have to do that
It
one.
really is. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's got,
Um,
I forget the title of the poem, but he's got this poem about jellyfish, which is this great, it's so it's interesting. I have this whole new list of structures on the website, right? So there's the structure and surprise. So I have the structure and surprise website. So I have collections of poems that are supplemental to the structures that are in structure and surprise, but I've got like this whole other dozen new structures, right? And one of them is called the metaphor to meaning poem. And I don't know the difference, but I have to still think through the difference between the metaphor to meaning poem and the emblem poem. They're very
mm.
similar to each other. But Mark's that jellyfish poem is very much kind of, it's almost a metaphor to meaning poem. It's a metaphor to meaning poem that's about making metaphors. But yeah, no, Mark Doty loves that zone of taking something in the world and then kind of trying to figure out what it wants to kind of reveal to us, what its message is, what we're to learn from it. And so he does these kind of deft interpretations of aspects of the world. It's beautiful. Yeah.
And I'm
So I love
so much,
his great poem, A Display of Mackerel,
I know, I
in
love that
structure and
poem. I
surprise. Yeah.
love that poem.
Yeah.
I will admit, I feel like I'm so much more superficial. I just like looking at pretty things and
Ha ha ha.
looking at
Right.
them for long periods of time. And then, my both of my parents are visual artists. So I think I kind of have that, but I do not have the patience to like learn how do you draw this? Oh, what do you have the textures? You have to put this layer down first and then put that layer and then let it dry. I don't have the patience for that. I would much prefer to just say like whale,
Right.
and
Right.
then the
Sure.
whale appears in your head and that's as far as it goes. I mean I think philosophical thoughts. I'm not a dummy, but truly, I tend to gravitate towards the emblem structure. Maybe I'm just a real visual learner, but I just get very fascinated by looking at images and imagery in the world and then
Good. I love
describing
it.
it.
That's
Yeah.
right. Good. Good.
Yeah. One thing I have emphasized, and you can tell me right on with this or disagree with me on it, but one thing that's come up with us in the group is asking those questions like, well, is this a metaphor or is this an emblem poem or is this an ironic poem? This seems to be an
Haha.
emblem
Right.
poem but seems to also have an ironic turn at the end. How should
Good.
I categorize this? And what I've told
Yeah.
everyone else is like, don't worry about it.
Yep.
That's not the point. That is not the
Yep.
point of looking at these structures.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Thank
Good.
you. I think that would be my response. So my response is right. And so when I teach these things, I kind of go like, look, the categories are good so that as a kind of general basis, as a way to begin to kind of see that structure exists and that we can identify how poems turn from something to other things. But then, but of course, right, then there are all sorts of hybrids of these structures. There are all different ways that poets, right, poets are an inventive bunch. So poets, of course, are always going to be kind of thinking about like, oh, this could be an emblem poem, but I'm going to add this ironic, weird little thing at the end. Great, right? Like, of course they do that. So Yeah, don't. It is not a kind of the taxonomy here is in no way designed to be complete and to kind of think that something could simply be put in one place or another. It is hopefully there to kind of spur thinking and to encourage thinking and a more advanced structural thinking about poems, but not at all to close it down. And if you feel like you're forcing something into a box, then in fact just think about making a different size box and naming it something else, right? And that's also, I think, when things get really fun and interesting, when things don't fit and you start finding out that, there are these other things that are kind of going on with poems, and I wonder if there are others of these out there in the world, and maybe it has some of its own rules, and I can write about it. It might be worth sharing with people, and you see what can happen as a result.
Well, that brings me to my next question because I was using structure and surprise, practically sleeping with it under my bed, under my pillow at night, trying to absorb all that knowledge and everything. And I thought, boy, I've got it. I've got all these structures. And you have a
Good.
chapter called I think Endless Structures, where you assure
Yeah,
everyone
yeah,
these are not the only structures. They don't all have to conform
yeah.
to these things. And then I don't remember when this happened. It was a couple of years ago. I think I just, Googled structure and surprise. I needed a new copy of the book or whatever. And I saw you had a blog and you've added all these new structures.
That's right, right.
So tell me about that. Like, was that
Yeah,
a big revelation? Like, did you think you were done when you were done with the book?
yeah.
What spurred you to start the blog?
The thanks, thank you. The amazing thing is that all of my work with various books invariably involves adding a folder that is called the next book. Anytime I write, I don't know, I overwrite, and then it turns out there are just things that don't fit and they have to go elsewhere. So I'm trying to think about some of those structures as I was finding some of those new structures. Um, but just kind of along the way, I was like, whoa, this is its own thing. So especially the metaphor to meaning. But or another big one that I kind of thought about that's not in structure and surprise is like the dream to waking structure, right? Like
Yeah.
poems love entering dreams, and sometimes they start off by being in dreams, and then they right, and then they wake up, or vice versa, or it's a different version of the descriptive meditative poem where it kind of goes like, okay, I'm waking and now I'm dreaming and now I wake up. And of course, if you wake up in a new twisted sense, it could be ironic, right? So, but I was some of those structures like dream to waking, it's like, how on earth did I not include that? And then with all due respect to all the people I talked about the book with, like, why didn't anybody else do the thing about structure is nobody else, nobody seems to be doing a lot of this work. So it turns out like um, yeah, that work was just there. So I'm glad to have that there. And thank you, Julianne, for your kind words about the blog. But I do think one of the future I'm at work on a different structure related project right now, but I think that at some point there will be essentially a kind of structure and surprise part two that looks at that kind of that really does a kind of that has a discussion of the new structures. They deserve their fuller treatment, just as the structures in structure and surprise have.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've said this before. I think when I read Structure and Surprise, it was maybe the second or third how to craft book, and I was 20 something. I mean, I wasn't ready for it. I was like kind of piecing through there with like a little pickaxe, getting through some of the academic language, going like, all right, and then I'd read the poems and go like, I see what's going on. I see what's going on.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And I've known some people who have felt intimidated by sort of the abstract philosophical
Yeah.
concepts. And
Yeah.
I say, that's cool. That's totally fine. And I'll give you the cliff notes. I'll give you the cliff notes. I want you to read the book. I tell you to read the book. I tell you to go buy the book, but I will just give you the cliff notes. Look, the ironic structure, just say something really random and unexpected and contradictory at the end of the poem. Like,
You
because you
got
can
it.
get that.
Boom.
you know,
There it is.
you know, dialectical structure. Have an argument. Describe an argument you're having between
Yeah.
yourself and the clouds, or an argument you're having
Yeah.
with yourself inside yourself. Like you don't have to have all of that philosophical grounding,
Yeah.
but it is really fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love the emblem structure where you talks about it being rooted in religion and like looking at the world as being the book that God gave you to look at.
Yeah,
And
you
how are
bet.
you reading it? How are you deciphering it? That like to me, that really enriches that experience, but
Yeah. Yeah.
don't don't have to know it
Yeah,
to
it's
write a
it's
poem that's
it's
describing
interesting.
things.
Yeah, I'm yeah, I hear that kind of that sense of that the book might have this kind of right, it might be a little bit almost a bit too bookish, right? And so but part of it is me honoring the discussion that came before me. So for example, like the descriptive meditative structure, right? Like that was a name given to that structure by the great scholar M.H. Abrams. And it's like, I'm not going to change his name. The ironic structure, that was the name given by Anne Malor. I'm not going to change that name, right? Like, and so when I think about like the dialectical argument, right, it feels like it's something really kind of maybe the name gives it a kind of air of sophistication, but right, once you look into it, it's something incredibly simple. It's like on the one hand, this, but on the other hand, this, and maybe we could meet in the middle, right? Like
Mhm.
that's right. And so that's a thesis, antithesis, synthesis. That's all that is. But dialectical argument, like there's a great essay by the mid 20th century critic Randall Jarrell called Levels and Opposites Structure in Poetry. And he in that talks about how he talks about the dialectical nature of so much poetry. And it very much is the poems that kind of move back and forth in these ways. And so that even that title is a bit of a nod to that conversation. And so yeah, no, I can imagine that for some readers it's a bit demanding. I hope people have good instructors like you, Tree, to
Yeah,
kind of say,
I was going to say thank you because that gives me something to do that like
right, exactly,
justifies my
un
existence here.
unpack stuff. Well, yeah, believe me.
Look, guys, I went to the thesaurus and I looked up
There you
all the
go.
complicated words or the
Yeah, there you
dictionary or
go. Good.
whatever.
Yeah, yeah,
We can
right.
boil it down and synthesize things this way.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, one thing I will make a plug. The woman who introduced me to Structure and Surprise, Sally Ashton, one of my first poetry teachers, and I owe her so much for bringing so much to my attention. But she has a wonderful essay that I'm going to completely blank on now. But she took Free Line. It's the Free Line poem, which I guess is, I think, maybe the closest thing you can get to having a poem without a structure. And I hope I'm
yeah.
doing this justice, but it's like the idea that when you're thinking your daily thoughts, like maybe you're not as structured, which mimics the chaos that I
That's
do
right.
in
You
my
bet.
head.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And so she talks about a free line poem where it's just one line after the other and they are all disparate. I guess it's like the Huzzall, except it's not even
Sure.
relying on like
You bet.
the musicality. Yet I have written several of those free line poems and there is still some kind of structure. There is a reason why you have to put them in this order and it doesn't work if it's in that order, or you take that line out, or you add this line in. Some of it is like, well, it has to have certain mood or tone, but it still has to have that sense of movement, like we've been through something by the end of this.
So that's you and I think share an aesthetic perhaps in that way. But let me be very clear. My position is not that a great poem must have a clear and distinct turn. I think poems are wild. Poetry is big. Poetry does all sorts of stuff. So my claim is not at all that this must. I think if 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 poetic structure jibes with your practice,
Mhm.
then use it, right? And so I noticed, I think again, Julianne, I think noted like that she's reading Ada Limon. If you're reading Ada Limon, you're reading poems that love the turn, right? Like
Yeah.
that is to think about so her sonnets. She's got, I forget the title of it, but there's this great sonnet that she has. It's a great metaphor to meaning poem about how no one told her about the ways that horses give birth to other horses, that horses come out fully grown and like already weak and wobbly, but they're already there. And then the great turn is like, that's how I love you, right? Like our
Mm.
love is this wobbly, strange thing, but it came out fully grown and ready to run, right? Um, like, so if that's the kind of poem, if you find power in that, then you want to figure out ways, now pardon the metaphor, you want to find ways to harness that power, right? I mean, but let me be very clear that like there certainly are all sorts of lyric poems and projects that the turn isn't crucial to them. So for example, I think about there's a book by the poet Lynn Heginian called The Unfollowing, and it's a book of 14-line poems. She talks about them as if they were sonnets, but they're sonnets that every line is a new line. They don't follow, right? And
Mhm.
so at that point, so and of course, Lynn Heginian is this great poet of what she calls kind of the open form. She doesn't want kind of closed forms where meaning is determined and there's kind of an effort to kind of say like this is what I'm doing, here's how I want you to read this. It's this other kind of sensibility. Now I'd say a couple things about this. One, there's a really interesting review of that book that points out that in fact it's not that that book has nothing to do with the turn, it's that it's all about turns, it's all about the volta. One. Two is that, right? Yeah, the poem is trying to enact a different kind of state that might be more chaotic, filled with unknowing, filled with blind turns. And you bet if you want to enact that, then go and do it. Um, um, but there's then and so those traditions and those possibilities in poetry absolutely exist,
Yes.
and for some people have tremendous value, and at times for me have tremendous value. um, but it seems as though a lot of people also want to write a different kind of poem that accumulates its force and directs its force and momentum in different ways, and frankly that surprises. When I when I Here's a little background story about structure and surprise is that early on when I was putting the book together, I was at a writing conference doing some presentations, and Billy Collins was there, and the book hadn't come out yet, but one of the people at the conference was like, Mike, talk to Billy about this book and see if you can get Billy Collins to like blurb the book or something. So I went up to him and I chatted briefly about the book. And he goes, because of course he adores the turn in his poems. Turns are everywhere in that, right? Even his project Poetry 180, a turning back to poetry, is all about turns. But he goes, I described the project, he goes, yeah, sounds good. He goes, what is it called? I said, Structure and Surprise. He goes, terrible title. And I said, oh, wait, what? And he said, well, it sounds just like, form and function, and I was like, absolutely. I said, but the thing about this book is that the second term is surprise. In
Mhm.
all of those pairings, sound and sense, form and function, nobody has yet begun to think about the fact that poems really want to shift into surprise and to try to be systematic about that. And he begrudgingly said, and then but he was, of course, I asked him like, what should I call it? And he of course said turn, turn, turn. And so I was like, not yet, maybe for a future book. But he was still kind enough to blurb the book finally. So
Yeah, the second follow-up will be turn, 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 turn some more.
right,
Put the left hand
yeah.
in, put the
Exactly.
left hand out, do the hokey pokey.
That is correct. Yeah, yeah.
Titles are so funny that way. A question that I do have, I don't know if this is useful as a, poetry teacher and mentor. I find this one interesting, but I do feel like there's maybe two structures, maybe three that I see all the time, and just whether people know how to write structure and surprise or not, they seem to gravitate towards this. And to me, it's the retrospective and prospective. Like maybe
Yeah,
it's poets, or maybe, we're all thinking about the past and reminiscing on that and finding something to learn from it. And then the other one, I think, is the descriptive meditative. I don't know
yeah,
if that's a thing poets and writers specifically do, but it's like whatever's going on out there in the world in front of me, I've still got something here that's cooking. And sometimes those two are, just talking back and forth. I'm curious if you think there are some forms that, let's say, are your favorite, the most productive. Do you have a favorite in all of these?
I can't pick among my babies. Which is that's the sickest thing I've ever said about my work, right? Like these are structures. I don't feel I let's see, let me think about my own work. Look, if it's okay, I'd like to, instead of kind of talking about types of turns, I'd like to instead maybe focus on a kind of a quality of turning. So one of the things I've been thinking about a bit more recently has been how, we talked just a little bit about surprise, but I'm really interested in this kind of quality that I've come to call fitting surprise, right? So it is something that is surprising, but of course it also kind of fits what came before it. So even that Jory Graham, right? It's an occasion and a cry of its occasion. It's not an occasion and a cry, right? So it's not that cry of, right, how does he live still fits the occasion. I I have I'm trying to do work right now that thinks a little bit more about surprise and that kind of clarifies that. Like, look, I love a good surprise. I love humor. I love twists in movies. I love all sorts of surprises. And I love surprises at different levels, from like radical shocks to kind of mild surprises. But
Yeah.
there is something pretty special about this quality that I've come to call fitting surprise, where there is something that happens where something happens so that I call it fitting surprise. Maybe it's ramifying surprise, where something happens in the surprise that feels immensely like eye-opening. It's not just shocking, it's somehow fitting. Um, right? So we know how this works. We can feel it like in mystery novels or in certain really well put together movies, right? But in poems, right, where it's like something happens where it's just like, whoa, that just fits. So there's a haiku by the master Isa I love that goes, the snow is melting and the village is flooded with children, right? And I
Mm,
love that ending where it's just like, whoa, right? It totally fits, totally surprising. And like when I think about turns that I love, if I come across a fitting and surprising turn, then I'm in the zone where I'm falling in love.
mm.
So for me, it's not a kind of turn, it's a quality of turn that I'm interested. But again, all of that is to say, there's all sorts of surprises. That's not to say one or the other is necessarily greater than the other, but I'm trying to kind of honor there's a difficulty to creating fitting surprise. They're the
Yeah.
tricky ones to make. And so when I see one, I honor it. And so KDAS is cry of the occasion, also the surprise. You bet. Yep. Yeah. In that kind of Jory system, the cry, the cry there embodies the kind of the surprised human perception that then responds in a surprised fashion, right? So
Mhm.
cry is the important word. It's not like the response to the occasion. It's not like the explanation of the occasion. It's the cry. And what makes it a cry is that it feels it one, the speaker is probably taken by surprise themselves.
Yeah, that I mean that's the Frost quote, no surprise in no, I think Frost quote is no
Yeah.
tears in the reader, no tears in the writer, no tears in the reader. And one could also say no surprise in the writer, no surprise in the reader. Something, and I hope this is useful for everyone else. I've worked with a lot of poets, and every once in a while someone will say, I'll be giving feedback and saying like, well, this ending line, I don't see how it fits. I'm not sure. And they're all like, well, yeah, I wanted that to come as a surprise at the end. The whole poem has been like trying to hide the fact that I'm going to say at the end of the poem, this actually stands
Yeah.
for this. And sometimes it works. Sometimes it
You
works. But a
bet.
lot of the time, what I find, especially in my own writing, if I know what I want to say and what I'm trying to do is hide it from the reader and be clever about hiding it from the reader, I feel fake in the
Sure.
poem
Yeah.
leading up to that. And no surprise in me, no surprise in the reader. I mean, not 100% of the time, but often it's like if there's something I know, the poem will just die on the vine. I have to ask the question, what do I not know? Or if this is the thing that I just realized, now I have to figure out, so what,
Right. Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so I'm
If
really
I
curious.
if I may
Yes, yeah,
about
go
that, I
right
would say
ahead.
a couple things. So I love this idea. I think it's important that the writing process be energizing. I completely understand that idea about needing to energize, keeping energized in the process. However, right, like boy, um, I'm totally fine with comedians not surprising themselves as they create their stuff as long as I get surprised, right? So
Yeah.
like I I'm much more in terms of kind of I'm a fan of the effect as opposed to like I think the creator I assume one very often works with a surprising poem and one is working with drafts of it where one is incredibly bored by it, right? Where it's like, this is a long draw. Why can't I figure this out? And then hopefully the surprise might come. But, yeah, I like that idea about surprise, but I wrestle with it. I would also say I'm intrigued by poems. There's a kind of poem. I don't know if it really is a whole variety of poem, but I've written a little bit about it on the blog, and I call it a filibuster poem. And it's a poem where somebody is really just delaying, uh,
Mhm.
just trying to delay. And then at the end, there's a kind of revelation about what they've been trying to hold off.
Yeah.
And so there's the poet Courtney Queenie has a couple really beautiful, there's a beautiful poem in there, which is again, I'm trying to think about the title, but it's essentially trying to kind of hold off a kiss, like a boy is trying to kiss her, and it's this enactment of like I'm doing all of these. It's as if in maybe a dorm room or a teenage bedroom, and like all of the things I'm trying to do to keep from this, and then it's like, and then there's his mouth, right? It's like
Mm.
finally there's only so much, and then I'm with you. Like it's a tricky thing to figure out these rules of surprise and how they work. So that's that's book number 5 or 6 down the road for me.
Yeah,
Although I hope that. I hope by that point other people will have really gotten much more into the conversation and will be writing more about that.
Oh,
But
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, so I want to amend what I said, and then I'm going to pivot to another question for you. So, there are definitely times when I am writing, if I start by saying I know where I want this to go, it ruins it for me.
sure,
However, that's the writing process. The editing process is another
right,
animal,
right,
and this happens
yeah,
all the time in workshop where someone says, like,
yeah,
this line here in the middle, you should actually move that to the end. And then
yeah,
and then you have this game of trying to figure out, well, okay, how do I make it flow so that it works with that being the last line or the first, and all that kind of stuff.
yeah.
So I think my question for you is when you are writing yourself, do you sit down and go, well, today I'm going to write a poem with an ironic turn, or do you only use it when you're editing? How does this book factor in for you in your own writing practice?
Editing. I mean,
Yeah,
or yeah, no, don't. I can't imagine anybody sitting down and determining I'm going to write this kind of poem, right?
yeah,
So the only way that that could kind of work is I think I'm interested in processes of writing like short poems, and so I think there are where did I put this? I think this might be on the blog. There's some stuff in there about like kind of some instructions, suggestions about how to like write ironic two-lined poems, right? That have
yes,
great setup and then like so there's the great two-line poem that, or I guess it has a title and a line, but there's the John Ashbery poem, right? That goes the title of which is "The Cathedral Was," and then the poem goes "Slated for Demolition," right? Like
yes,
that, boom, 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 right? So you could, I think one could have a blast, right? Sitting there, especially with some friends, like just creating a whole bunch of short, ironic poems, right? So you can definitely use it. Structures can be used as kind of right as an invention process, but I think much more it comes in later in the drafting process. So for example, like Linda Gregerson even kind of talks about how she talks about like going elsewhere in a poem. And so she's like, look, at some point about two-thirds, three-quarters of the way through the poem, you realize like you just decided to keep going the same direction. She's like, what you got to do is like cut the poem there and go somewhere else. And I was
yeah.
like, if that's not the turn, I don't know what it is, right? So that and then that's either late in drafting where you've just got something on the page, something to work with, and then you start thinking in all those ways about the different types of forms that this might move in, the different structures that might inform that writing, and then you go from there, and then you show a teacher who tells you you did it all wrong. Yeah, or something.
That's an interesting turn there, Mike. I wasn't
All
expecting
right.
you to say that. I mean, well, this could go like down like such a rabbit hole, but have you encountered a teacher going like, you did it all wrong, and you have to go, I wrote the book, I did it all right,
Mhm.
no, because there is so much ambiguity. We've started a press now called Odd Pocket Press, and I
Great.
am
Congrats.
realizing I'm doing something kind of unique. I hopefully positive, unique, positive, different, where I gather together like five readers and I let them choose the poems that they think are ready to go. And rather than have us all meet together and we all have to agree on poems, it's like, well, if one person feels that this one's ready, yeah, okay. And boy, does it make you realize just how completely unpredictable,
Subjective.
subjective. Yeah, because there's a poem where I'm like, oh, this is a perfect poem. I wouldn't change a line. And no one chooses it besides me. And they're all like, yeah,
Right.
we thought, I mean, it was good, but they needed to change this, they needed to cut that out. It's completely subjective. It's so
It is.
completely subjective. One of the things that I really love doing with using structure and surprise rather than ever tell anyone, hey, I think this poem is great, and it really feels like it's definitely retrospective, prospective poem. Uh I never know. I never know what's gonna help unlock things, or if it's not very, very clear where the turn is, or there's no turn in it, I'll find that I will say, well, this is about something that happened 2 years ago, so maybe try giving it a retrospective prospective structure. But if
Yeah,
that doesn't work, you could also try this dialectic, the mid-court,
you
and I'll
bet.
just kind of,
You bet.
I mean, sometimes it's very arbitrary. Sometimes I just go through and I'm like,
Ah,
try this
ah,
one, try this one, try this
ah.
one, try this one, try this one.
I have a feeling you're underselling yourself there, Tree, about the ways that you engage it. I mean, I think it's incredibly savvy and
Hmm.
kind to respect that a person is still working on something and to help
Yeah.
them think through that there are these different moves that a draft might make. And so to say, yeah, and so to say, look, if you're going for this, maybe try this. If what you're doing is this, and even that might be, that feels like it's a gentle way of kind of saying there's some things that this draft isn't yet kind of clear on what it's doing and what it wants. And so, right, to kind of go as you clarify what you want, and to help you clarify that, maybe explore the retrospective, prospective, maybe explore the dialectical, and see if some of those poems help you determine what kind of poem this is becoming, right? So that just sounds like that's not arbitrary at all. That's working with a beautiful early draft and respecting the poet and respecting the fact that poems turn in different ways. No, that's the beauty and the trickiness of the process.
Well, and I mean, yes, I am being a little underselling myself there, but sometimes what happens for me, if I have a poem where it's just like, this nut will not crack. If you've
Right.
ever found a coconut on the beach and tried to crack it
Sure.
open,
Sure.
um, because I lived in Costa Rica for 3 years and I found a lot of coconuts on the beach, and you have to wonder, like, how did we ever discover there was food inside of this? They are if
Right.
you don't have a hammer, they are hard to crack.
Yeah.
So I have a couple poems where like this, where I'm like, I know there's something in here I want to say, and nothing feels right. I've said this, I've said that, I've written it upside down, backwards in Swahili, translated it into English and Urdu and back to English again, and nothing feels right. And usually for me, because I don't have someone else's perspective, like I will just literally go through structure and surprise and go like, you tried the
Cool.
ironic ending. Yep, let's try that. Does
Yeah.
it feel good? Maybe not really.
Yeah.
Let's try that again. All right, let's try writing this as a dialectical. Let's try writing as this. Let's try writing it as that. Let's play some bongos on its head. Let's try making it a
Right.
funny poem. And it just until, and usually I don't have to get all the way through, but usually something will happen where I go, oh, that's good enough. I had no idea I needed to say that, but now that I do, totally get it. So I say that to you again to say how much I enjoyed this book and how useful it's been, but also I want anyone listening to know that it's a great way to get to know the book Structure and Surprise, to get to know the blog Structure and Surprise. If you want to write the same poem over and over, but with a different structure, that's just a great way to really get in depth, focusing on the structure and not get distracted by all that content or meaning, but just play with the structure. And that can be so useful. I don't think I can say that I've ever had a poem where I went through all of the chapters of structure and surprise and didn't at one point, find that cracking
Stumble on
point on the
something.
coconut.
Good. Beautiful.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
wedge to the milk. Right.
You
Okay.
know, I
Good.
I I do have one more question, and then I'll
Yeah.
I'm not seeing anyone putting questions in the chat. I promise I'm not ignoring you guys.
Haha.
If you have a
Cora
question,
raised a finger.
yeah, Cora, do you have a question?
A couple of us really enjoyed Autobiography of Red by Anne Carson.
Great.
And I wonder, is that in a structure? There's just something so wonderful about it. You can't put it down, but I don't know if it has chapters or not, but it sort of reads very freeform.
Yeah, it's great. I don't, it's been forever since I've read Autobiography of Red. I fear I can't say too much about it. Anne Carson's more recent, more recent, I mean, since 2000, those poems really defy, I think they defy structure in a variety of ways. Her early works, um, they defy it in ways that her early works don't. I'm a huge fan of her book Plain Water and her book Glass, Irony, and God, and those have kind of shorter, some more compact lyrics that I think can be much more informed by structure and surprise. Um, but structure and surprise might not have a lot to say about or to a book like the autobiography of Red. I hope that I might be wrong about that, that within it there might be some structures, but I don't know about the applicability there.
Oh, teacher, I have the answer. I have the answer.
Please.
So I cheated because I asked the internet. So as I understand it, and Cora, full disclosure, I haven't read it, but you guys are always bringing me such wonderful reading recommendations, so now I have to read it. But the quick little looking up that I did on the internet basically said it's a novel in verse and it's a coming of age novel. So purely, I might be wrong on this. I might have a different opinion after I read it. But my guess would be like, look at the totality of the poems and maybe even think about it less in terms of structure and surprise, the poetry, and more about the structure of the coming of age story. Um,
Right, it's a
we can,
much
yeah.
longer work, and so yeah, it might be right using some of those other genres to help organize its component
Mm.
parts. Yeah,
Here's a project on that topic of the longer piece. And after I've read Autobiography of Red, Cora and everyone, maybe we can have a and I can make some more useful comments. Uh but um but I'm bookmarking that for a little bit later. But one thought I've had in looking at my own collections of poetry is I'd love to go through and just see if I've got a variety of structures. Have you ever read a book and like really made note of how the structures show up? And like, let's say, I mean, we were just talking about Mark Doty and how so many of his poems are emblem structure. I mean, do you ever go through someone's book and go, no, they wrote nothing but ironic structured poems? Or I mean, there are a lot that are like pretty much all elegy straight through. Because they're called, I think, what is it,
all
Mary Jo Bang has an entire book just called Elegy or
or
Elegies, I think. So yeah, tell
all
me
the
about
time,
that.
all the time. So,
Okay.
and I would argue though the good news is it's not just me. There's a terrific essay by Hank Laser on the poetry of Ray Armentrout,
Okay.
and it's called Lyricism of the Swerve on the poetry of Ray Armentrout, and essentially. Hank Laser kind of reads Ray Armentrout as somebody who creates ironic turns, right? Like this
Mm,
is it's one of those this is in part what my latest book project is trying to kind of think through the fact that like we have these disparate works that are interested in the turn, but we're not talking to each other yet. So like Hank Laser is essentially kind of saying Ray Armentrout does the ironic turn repeatedly in these different ways. And Ray Armentrout's a fantastic poet. Um, but I'm like, at some point, like we need to realize that like there are ways in which he thinks Ray Armantrout is singular for that. And I think she is a singular poet, but she's
Hmm.
not singular for her use of the ironic structure. Plenty of people do that. The question is then, does she do it well in comparison and contrast to those other people? And I think the answer is yes, but Hank Laser doesn't seem to think that that's an important question to ask in his essay. Um, so so you bet there are times when you read and you kind of go like, this is that. So that's how Hank Laser read Ray Armstrong. But I'm always looking at that. I last spring and summer I worked incredibly hard on an essay on Jory Graham's poetry. It's called what's it called? Something something Jory Graham Metamorphosis, Jory Graham's Transformative Turns. Jory Graham, again, she's the person who I credit with kind of giving me the turn. She loves the turn. And she has
Hmm.
this statement of poetics from 2001 called Something of Moment. And the turn is explicit in there. It's amazing that no critic so far has really taken that up to really begin to explore her work with the turn specifically in mind. And so that's what I tried to do in that essay. And
Oh,
there's,
that's
I think I
interesting.
made
Yeah.
some, I think there's some interesting discoveries in that essay, including in her great previous book, 22040. She's got this moment where she actually, I'm really interested in different words that people use for turn. And she's got this thing where she talks about craning. So, like craning the neck. And she's talking about how for Jory, the turn is this beautiful, fully human sort of action that we can do. The world does its thing and we can respond fully to it. But in the terrifying book 22040, she imagines this apocalyptic future that we're already on the beginning fringes of. And she's like that one of the terrifying ways that the apocalypse embodies itself for her is that this kind of fully humane and fully imaginative and invested turn doesn't quite exist anymore. All there might be is like this kind of desperate craning around for something, but it's not clear that there's any longer any prospect or refuge. For somebody who loves the turn, it's a truly terrifying vision. And so do I read people with turns in mind? Last year, all I did was trawl through Jory Graham poems, looking for their turning dynamics, and it was an amazing read. She's a great poet. She's at the heights of her power. And some of her turns are truly spectacular. If you want a spectacular turn, go
Mm.
read Jory Graham's poem called Thaw. And you can find it online. Just Google Jory Graham Thaw. It's spectacular. It's truly beautiful. It's, I don't know, maybe hopeful, or at least it
Mm.
reminds us of a kind of turning that existed when we were still human beings.
Oh, wow. That reminds me of Kurt Vonnegut's novel Timequake. Are you familiar with that one?
Yeah,
Of
again, I read it a while back.
It's been a while. Yeah, I mean, I only read it once and probably 15 years ago, but certain concepts like stick with you. And it God, I don't think this would be giving anything away, but the concept is that we're stuck in a time quake, and there's a time quake and everyone goes back in time 10 years, and they have to relive the last 10 years of their life, but they have no capacity to change anything. So you're repeating mistakes that you know are mistakes. You're heading towards like the crash, knowing you're heading towards the crash and completely incapable of
Oof.
having any agency.
Huh.
And yeah, I mean, talk about like,
I'll have to check it out again. It sounds amazing. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, but I think that's sort of like at the end, and everyone check out Kurt Vonnegut because you're getting my misremembering of it, but he's like, the last 10, the time quake ends and people are able to have agency again. And he goes like, the last 10 years we've been sick, but now we're well again. We're able to, and that's part of what Vonnegut meditates on in so many of his novels is just like, do you have free will? Do we really have free will at all? And what if we don't? And what if we're all aliens in a zoo and the Tralfamadorians are watching us? And I love Vonnegut. I love Vonnegut so much. He is probably one of my favorite authors of all time. And Michael Theune, we're coming towards the end,
So
but
if
I'll just say again, your book and blog is one of my favorite craft books and blogs of all time.
you're too kind, thank you. Can I quickly say
Yes, please do.
we definitely are aliens, right?
Uh-huh.
We are aliens to ourselves for most of our lives we are, and this is why, right, turns are so vital. It's fascinating to think back. Actually, sorry, Jory Graham is figuring here, but she actually has in that poem of hers, Prayer, which seems to be about those minnows, actually strategically, I think, quotes two different James Tate poems, including an amazing poem called Consumed. And Consumed is about how our lives, he says in that poem, he says, a dark star passes through us and never again are we the same, right? And then he actually, he has in that poem the lines, right, the longing is to be pure, right? What you get is to be changed, or lines very much like that. Like Jory lifts those lines from this poem. Again, I think she does so strategically, but it's this real nod to the fact that we are subject to massive forces beyond us and also forces within us. We're lucky if we know ourselves well. We're lucky if we make choices that we can vaguely understand. We're lucky if our values line up with each other. We're but that's incredibly rare. And it turns out that poetry can kind of be this place, right, where we can take some control over, or at least play with, toy with what these turns and transformations are and potentially make something kind of beautiful and maybe powerful out of them. But
Yeah.
they're all roiling outside of us. They're roiling within us. The self is a tiny ship on storm-tossed seas, and so um, uh, attending to turns, sometimes controlling them, sometimes just running with them. Um, it's where the art form of poetry really begins to align with our lives in
Yeah.
fascinating ways and challenge us and permit us to play with this aspect of our lives that can be so painful at times.
This is the first time, this may be the first time I've ever recommended this book to a fellow poet. I've recommended the book before though. There's a great book called Why God Won't Go Away: The Neurobiology of Belief. And I will fully admit it's esoteric and it's hard to get through. So you can also just look up the author and look up this really good interview he does.
Love it.
It's a little bit easier to understand. But he talks about the epiphany. And he's
Mm.
a neuroscientist. He's talking about the epiphany in terms of religion,
Mm.
the religious epiphany, and I'm gonna probably not do it justice, but my understanding of it is like we have the logical brain, we have the intuitive brain. And when you're trying to find the meaning of something, is very much like the emblem structure, looking at the world and trying to find what all these images might symbolize or mean. Um, outside of Plato's cave, you know, uh, he says that there's like the logical, tactile, measurable brain, or the brain that looks at those things, and then the intuitive brain, it's more emotional and everything. And when the two of them both wind up in the same place, you're looking, and he uses the they, because it's two researchers, but they use the example of earlier people when people die, you might burn them on the fire and you see their body turn to flame and then turn to smoke and the smoke rises up. And so you think, well, heaven and the afterlife must be up because the smoke that is taking away their body is going up. So heaven must be up there beyond the clouds, right? And that's the creative, imaginative,
Yeah.
intuitive, emotional brain, and then
Yeah.
the logical brain, and they come to an agreement with each other. And that's when you get the aha moment, you
Yeah.
know? And I think that's
Yeah.
what poetry is. It's
I
like
love it.
we're just looking for that aha moment. And every poet who I talk to, um, I'll plug the interview I did with Danusha Ramirez, and I'll just plug Danusha Ramirez. She's amazing. But she talks about like I think she compared it to going on a horse ride through her mind. And then all of a sudden you leave the forest and you're out there in the clear, or you make a turn and you see something suddenly that, you didn't even know you were looking for. And you just get that, oh, I discovered something. And when that happens, it's just like, why anyone does anything besides sitting and writing poetry all day. I just sometimes feel like you guys are all out there like looking to have major swimming pools or go to Mars. Just sit with the journal. The inside of your head is
Right.
interesting enough. So anyways, thank you so much for being here, for writing this book, for writing the blog. Uh I presume you'll be going, or did you already say you're going to AWP in Chicago
I'll be
in
there
20?
definitely. Yeah, Tree. Let me before we kind of so I'll be in Chicago. Everybody gathered here before we kind of say goodbye to. Let me quickly say thank you to everybody here. I also want to say that if there are kind of further questions so a great place to contact me is to use some of the features of the blog to write something or just look me up. So I'm Michael Theune. I teach in the English department at Illinois Wesleyan University. You can easily find my faculty page, which has an email. If you have questions that you didn't get to ask and that were provoked through our conversation, please feel free to reach out to me. I love this stuff. I love teaching. I love talking turns. So please don't hesitate to reach out if anything occurred to you here or if anything occurs to you afterwards. I would love to extend the conversation in that way. So don't hesitate.
Absolutely. Party at Mike's house. I'm going to stop the recording, and then if anyone's got a burning question now, but you just didn't want to ask it on the record, that's totally cool. I'll hang out a bit. Mike, I don't know if you can, but
Sure.
as long as you can. So everyone watching at home, hey, join the poetry salon. You get to be part of these great conversations with great poets and mentors. The poetry salon stack.substack.com. We're easy to find. Okay, I'm going to end the recording.